Welcome back. Get comfortable. Dim the lights, find the soft place where your head likes to rest, and let your shoulders fall away from your ears. There is nothing you need to do for the next little while. Nothing to solve, nothing to chase. You only have to breathe, and listen, and let the words carry you somewhere old and far away. Tonight we are going to a city. It is a tall, crowded, gas-lit city of black iron and grey stone, and its name is Yharnam. It sits in a valley somewhere outside of time, beneath a moon that hangs too low and too large in the sky, and it has a secret buried deep beneath its streets. Tonight, slowly and gently, we are going to uncover that secret from the very beginning. We are going to follow the whole long history of this place, from the first time anything human went down into the dark, all the way to the night the moon turned the colour of blood and the hunt began. You may know this world already. You may have walked its cobblestones, lantern in hand, listening to the church bells and the howling that answered them. Or you may be hearing of it for the first time, drifting in with no idea what waits in the cathedral, or the woods, or the dream. It does not matter. This story is built to hold you either way. The veterans among you will find old details polished and set in their proper order. The newcomers will be taken by the hand and shown each thing as it comes, with no need to have seen any of it before. Here is the only thing you truly need to know before we start. Bloodborne is a story about discovery. It is about people who looked into the dark and found something looking back, and who could not stop themselves from reaching toward it. It is about a city that tried to cure its sickness with the wrong medicine, and about gods who were not cruel, only lonely and grieving, and far too large for the small minds that found them. It is sad, and it is strange, and underneath all the horror there is something almost tender. That tenderness is what we will follow tonight, like a thread through a labyrinth. So let us begin the way all of this began, not in the city, and not on the night of the hunt, but long, long before any of that. Before the church, before the scholars, before the first lantern was ever lit. We are going down, beneath the stones, into the deep places of the earth, to a time when the first people of this land lifted their eyes towards something vast and silent in the dark below. Let your breathing slow, let the city above fade. We are going down to where it all began. Chapter 1. The Great Ones and the Deep Below. In the beginning of this history, there were no hunters and no city. There was only the land, and beneath the land there was the deep. It helps to start with the gods, because in Yharnam everything begins and ends with them. They are called the Great Ones, and they are the closest thing this world has to true divinity. But you must let go of every picture you have of what a god should be. The Great Ones are not kindly old men on thrones, and they are not wrathful kings demanding worship. They are something else entirely. They are vast beings of a higher order of life. Creatures that exist on a plane the human mind was never built to perceive. Some say they came from the cosmos, drifting down from between the stars. Others say they were always here, sleeping in the dark beneath the earth, older than the soil itself. Both things may be true. With the Great Ones, contradictions tend to sit comfortably side by side. What matters most about them is this, and it is the gentle, sorrowful heart of the entire tale. The Great Ones are sympathetic in spirit. For all their terrible scale and their alien shape, they are not monsters of malice. They feel, and the feeling that defines them, the ache that drives nearly everything that will happen across the centuries to come, is the loss of their children. The Great Ones lose their offspring. Again and again, across ages we cannot count, they conceive, and they birth, and they lose. And so they reach out, across the gulf between their kind and ours, searching for a surrogate, searching for a child to take the place of the one that slipped away. That yearning, that grief, that has no bottom, is the engine of this whole history. Every ritual, every experiment, every horror you will hear about tonight grows from someone, human or god, trying to bridge an impossible distance and hold something they have lost. Now the Great Ones did not announce themselves. They did not descend in fire to be worshipped. They waited in the deep, in the labyrinths and the tombs far below the surface of the world, and for the longest stretch of time, no one knew they were there at all. The earth above turned through its seasons. People lived and died on the surface, and never suspected that beneath their feet, in chambers of cold stone, something immense was dreaming. Picture that deep place for a moment, because we will return to it often. Imagine descending a long stone stair that spirals down into darkness, the air growing cooler and heavier with every step, until the light of the world above is only a memory, and then not even that. Imagine vast underground halls held up by pillars the size of trees, their surfaces carved with symbols no living tongue can read. Imagine still pools of black water, and bridges over nothing, and far off in the dark, the slow, patient presence of something that has been waiting longer than there have been words for waiting. This is the realm of the Great Ones. It is the oldest place in the story, and one day, a very long time ago, the first people went down into it. Chapter 2. The Pumerians and Queen Yharnam. The first people to find the Great Ones were the Pumerians. The name is spelled with a silent beginning, and you may simply say it as the mere Eons. They were an ancient civilization, a lost race, who lived in the deep places of the earth, far below where Yharnam would one day stand. By the time the city above was even a thought in anyone's mind, the Pumerians had already risen, flourished, and begun their slow decline. They are the foundation beneath the foundation. Everything that comes after rests on top of what they did first. The Pumerians built their kingdom underground, an immense network of labyrinths and tombs and ceremonial chambers carved into the living rock. They were not simple cave dwellers. They raised arches and staircases and great vaulted rooms. They buried their dead in elaborate sepulchres, and above all, they communed with the Great Ones. The Pumerians were the first to look upon those vast beings and not go entirely to pieces. They studied them, they served them, they learned, in their way, to speak with them. And for this devotion, they were granted gifts, and they were marked by tragedy in equal measure. At the centre of the Pumerian story is their queen. Her name was Yharnam, the same name that would much later be given to the city above, in her memory. Queen Yharnam was the most revered figure of that ancient people, and her story is the first great sorrow of this whole history. For Queen Yharnam communed with a Great One, and she became pregnant. She carried within her the child of a god, a union between the human and the cosmic that should never have been possible, and for a moment it must have seemed like the most wondrous thing in the world. The deep kingdom would have a child born of both flesh and divinity. The bridge between the two kinds of life would finally be built. But the child was lost. We do not know every detail of how, and perhaps it is kinder that we do not. What we know is the grief. Queen Yharnam, who had carried a god's child, was left with empty arms and a sorrow so deep it seemed to soak into the very stones of the kingdom. There are images of her still, far down in the oldest tombs, a silent weeping figure, and the blood that runs from her seems to never stop. She became a symbol of the great theme we spoke of, the loss that gods and mortals share. A queen who reached for the highest possible union and was left holding only absence. If you remember nothing else of the Pumerians, remember her. The first attempt to join human and Great One ended in mourning, and that mourning never truly ended. It only went quiet and waited, like everything else in the deep. The Pumerian kingdom did not last forever. Like all civilizations, it began to fracture. It split, in time, into different branches and different realms within the deep. There was Pthumeru itself, the central and oldest. There was Lauren, a desert kingdom that fell to a sickness all its own, a beastly curse that we will meet again in another form. And there was Is, a realm that drew especially close to the cosmos and the Great Ones who dwelled nearest to the stars. Each of these places sank into its own kind of ruin. The Pumerians, for all their wisdom, could not hold what they had built. Their cities became tombs, their living became dead, and the labyrinths fell silent again, full of treasures and terrors and sleeping gods, waiting for the next foolish, brilliant, grieving people to come down and find them. That silence held for a very long time. The surface world forgot the deep entirely. New peoples rose above the old buried kingdoms and never knew what lay beneath their fields and their roads. And then, one day, far closer to our own part of the story, a group of scholars went looking. They went down into the tombs of the Thumerians, and they found the relics and the chalices and the carved symbols and the lingering presence of the Great Ones. And from the moment those scholars climbed back up into the light, nothing in this world would ever be the same. That is where we go next. To the surface, to a quiet college on the edge of a misty lake, and to the man whose curiosity would set the whole tragedy in motion. Chapter 3. Byrgenwerth and Master Willem. Leave the deep behind for a while now, and rise back up toward the surface, toward grey daylight and the smell of cold lake water. We have come forward in time, past the fall of the Thumerians, past the long forgetting, to an age much closer to the city we began with. Here, on the shore of a misty lake surrounded by ancient woods, stands a place of learning. It is a college, old and ivy-grown, its tall windows looking out over the water. Its name is Byrgenwerth, which you may say as Byrgenwerth, and it is here that the modern part of our story truly begins. Byrgenwerth was a college of scholars, and its purpose was the pursuit of knowledge. But not ordinary knowledge. The scholars of Byrgenwerth were obsessed with the highest and strangest questions a mind can ask. What lies beyond the reach of human senses? What truths are hidden from us simply because our eyes are too few and too weak to see them? Is it possible for a person to evolve, to ascend, to perceive the world as the Great Ones perceive it? These were the questions that hung in the air of Byrgenwerth like the mist on the lake, and the man who asked them most fiercely was the college's master. His name was Willem, which you may say as Will-em, and he was the head of the school, an old and brilliant scholar whose mind reached constantly toward things just out of his grasp. Master Willem believed with all his heart that humanity could be more than it was. He believed that the human race was held back by the limits of its own senses, that we are like creatures blinking in the dark, aware that there is more light somewhere, but unable to turn our heads toward it. And he had a phrase, a kind of mantra, that captures everything about him. He believed that to ascend, humanity needed more eyes. We are born of the blood, made men by the blood, undone by the blood. Our eyes are yet to open. Fear the old blood, and again in his notes and his murmurings, that strange and haunting wish. Eyes. We need more eyes. He did not mean eyes the way you might first imagine, not simply more eyeballs in a face. He meant something deeper. To Willem, eyes were a symbol of insight, of perception, of the ability to comprehend higher truths. To gain eyes on the inside, in the brain, in the soul, was to become capable of seeing the cosmos as it truly is, to lift the veil between the human world and the world of the Great Ones. This was the dream of Byrgenwerth. To gain enough insight that humanity itself might transcend its small blind condition and ascend toward the divine. It was a beautiful dream, in its way. It was also a doorway to ruin, though Willem could not yet see that, for all his longing to see. To chase this dream, Willem sent his scholars down into the deep. They explored the old labyrinths, the buried kingdoms of the Thumerians that had lain silent for ages. They brought back relics and chalices and carvings. They studied the burial chambers and the cosmic symbols. And down there, in the tombs of that ancient people, the scholars of Byrgenwerth found two things that would change history. They found knowledge of the Great Ones, real and direct, the lingering presence of beings beyond comprehension. And they found the old blood. The old blood. Hold that phrase gently in your mind as you drift, because it is the most important substance in this entire story. The old blood was a mysterious, powerful fluid discovered in the depths, tied somehow to the Great Ones themselves. It was unlike anything the scholars had ever seen. It seemed to carry within it a fragment of cosmic power, a trace of the divine, a medicine and a poison and a sacrament all at once. When the scholars brought knowledge of the old blood back up to Bergenworth, the whole quiet college trembled with the possibilities. Here, perhaps, was the key to everything. Here was a substance that touched the Great Ones directly. With it, surely, humanity might finally take the step it had always longed to take. But Master Willem, old and wise and frightened, looked at the old blood and felt a cold dread settle into his bones. Fear the old blood, he had written, and he meant it. Willem believed that the path to ascension lay through the mind, through insight gained carefully and slowly, through eyes opened by understanding. He did not believe the answer could simply be drunk, or injected, or poured into the veins of ordinary people. He sensed, somehow, that the old blood was too much, too raw, too dangerous, that to use it carelessly would not lift humanity up, but drag it down into something bestial and wrong. And so Willem refused. He turned away from the blood, and he counselled caution and patience, and the slow opening of inner eyes. Not everyone at Bergenworth agreed with him, and the disagreement that followed between the old master and his most devoted pupil was the crack from which the entire flood would pour. That pupil's name was Lawrence. And in the next part of our story, the friendship between these two men will break. A new and terrible institution will be born, and the city of Yharnam will begin its long, beautiful, doomed love affair with blood. Breathe slowly now. The mist is lifting off the lake, and a young man is about to make a choice that will damn a city. Let us follow him. Chapter 4. Lawrence and the birth of the healing church. The young man's name was Lawrence, which you may say as Lawrence, and he was Master Willem's most brilliant and most devoted student. Where Willem was old and cautious, Lawrence was young and burning with conviction. He had stood at his master's side through all the long study of the deep. He had seen the relics brought up from the tombs. And when the old blood was discovered, Lawrence looked at it and saw something entirely different from what his master saw. Where Willem saw danger, Lawrence saw salvation. You must understand what kind of man Lawrence was, because he was not a villain. He is one of the most sympathetic figures in this whole history, and the tragedy of Yharnam is in large part the tragedy of his good intentions. Lawrence believed that the old blood could heal. He believed it could cure sickness, mend the broken, drive out plague and disease and suffering, and in this he was not wrong, at least not at first. The old blood truly could heal. It worked miracles. A person on the edge of death could be brought back. Wounds could close, fevers could break, the dying could rise from their beds and walk again. To a young scholar with a kind heart who looked out at a world full of suffering, the choice must have seemed obvious. How could anyone hold back a medicine that could save so many lives? How could caution and patience justify letting people die when the cure was right there, glowing in a vial? And so Lawrence and Willem came to their parting. It was not a war, not at first. It was a disagreement between two men who had loved and respected each other, two men who both wanted humanity to rise. But they could not be reconciled. Willem clung to his path of inner eyes and careful insight and his deep instinctive fear of the blood. Lawrence believed the blood was the way forward, the gift that should be shared with the world. There came a day when the two of them sat together for the last time as master and pupil, and Lawrence rose and left Bergenworth and did not come back. He took the knowledge of the old blood with him, and Willem, old and alone on the shore of his misty lake, was left to watch from a distance as everything he had feared came slowly, beautifully, terribly true. Lawrence went out into the world and founded a new institution. He called it the Healing Church. And its mission was exactly what its name suggests: to heal, to use the old blood to cure the sick and comfort the suffering and drive disease out of the land. The Healing Church offered a sacrament it called blood ministration, the careful giving of the old blood to those in need. A patient would come, ill or injured, and receive the blood and be made well. It was, in its early days, a thing of genuine mercy. People who would have died now lived. Plagues that would have swept through whole towns were turned back, And the healing church grew, as such things do, from a small band of believers into a vast and powerful body, rich and respected and trusted, the spiritual and medical heart of a whole region. At the centre of this new church, of course, was a city. The city took the name of the ancient Pumerian queen, who wept in the deep below. It was named Yharnam in her memory, though almost no one who lived there understood why, or knew what slept beneath their streets. Yharnam grew up around the healing church the way a town grows up around a holy well. People came from far away seeking the miraculous blood. The church built great cathedrals and hospitals and workshops. The city rose tall and crowded, all black iron railings and steep grey rooftops and narrow winding lanes, gas lamps glowing against the perpetual gloom. And through all of it, like a current beneath the cobblestones, ran the blood. Yharnam became a city built on blood healing. To live there was to trust in the blood. To be sick was to seek the blood. To worship was, in a quiet way, to worship the blood. But the old blood was not ordinary medicine. It came from the great ones. It carried within it a fragment of the cosmic, a trace of those vast and alien beings sleeping in the deep. And Master Willem's fear, the fear that Lawrence had set aside in the name of mercy, had not been foolish, it had only been early. For the old blood gave with one hand and took with the other. It healed the body, yes, but it also began, slowly and quietly at first, to change the people who took it, to open something in them, to call something out. The miracle medicine of the healing church carried within it the seed of a curse. And in time, that seed would bloom into the single most terrible affliction this city would ever know. Yharnam did not yet know it was sick, but the sickness was already in its veins, glowing softly, biding its time. Rest now, and we will follow the blood as it does its slow and dreadful work. Chapter 5. The blood and the beginning of the scourge. For a while the city of Yharnam lived in something close to a golden age. The healing church flourished. The old blood flowed. The sick were made well, and the people were grateful, and they gave their devotion to the church and its miraculous medicine. If you had walked the streets of Yharnam in those days, you would have seen a proud and prosperous city, its cathedrals gleaming, its citizens hale and hearty, its faith strong. You would not have seen the rot beneath. But it was there, and it was spreading. The trouble with the old blood was that it did not simply heal and then leave. It lingered. It worked its way into the body and the blood of those who took it, and over time, with repeated use, it began to transform them. This was the great hidden cost of the church's miracle, and it has a name. It is called the beastly scourge, or simply the scourge of the beast. The old blood, that gift from the great ones, slowly turned the people who relied upon it into beasts. Imagine it happening gradually, the way a sickness creeps. A person takes the blood to heal an illness, and they are cured, and they are glad. They take it again, perhaps the next time they fall ill, because it worked so well before. And somewhere in there, something begins to change. Their senses sharpen unnaturally. Their temper grows short and savage. Hair begins to grow where it should not. Their teeth lengthen. Their hands curl into claws. Their spine bends. The mind clouds over with a red and bestial rage, and the person who once prayed in the cathedral and loved their family becomes a snarling, monstrous thing, a beast that knows only hunger and fury. The transformation could be slow or sudden. It could take years, or it could come on in a single dreadful night. But the direction was always the same. The blood that healed the body devoured the soul. This is the beast plague, the beastly scourge, and it became the central horror of Yharnam's existence. The very medicine that the city loved and trusted was the thing that was turning its citizens into monsters. And worse, the scourge could spread, for the bite or blood of a beast could pass the affliction to others, so that one transformed soul could become two, and two could become many, until whole districts fell to the curse. The healing church, which had built its power and its glory on the gift of healing, now faced a catastrophe entirely of its own making. The blood was both the cure and the disease, and the church could not simply stop, for the blood was the foundation of everything it was. everything the city believed, everything that gave the church its wealth and power. To admit that the blood was the source of the scourge would have been to admit that the entire church was built on a poison. And so, like so many institutions faced with the consequences of their own choices, the church chose to manage the disaster rather than confront its root. How do you manage a plague of beasts? You need someone to put the beasts down. You need men and women willing to go out into the night, when the transformed roam the streets, and end them before they can spread the curse or tear the innocent apart. You need hunters. And so, out of the beastly scourge, the hunters were born. They were the city's answer to its own affliction, a grim and necessary profession that grew up in the shadows of the healing church. When night fell and the beasts emerged, the hunters went out with their cleavers and their torches and their guns, and they did the dark work that kept the city alive. It was brutal work, and it was lonely work, and it changed those who did it. For to hunt beasts, night after night, soaked in blood, surrounded by death, was itself a kind of slow corruption. Hunters could lose themselves to the bloodlust of the hunt, could come to crave the killing, could begin to blur the line between the beasts they slew and the thing they were becoming. The hunt was meant to save the city from the curse, but the hunt carried its own curse within it. Everything in Yarnarm, it seems, came at a hidden price. We have met the city, and the blood, and the scourge, and now the hunters. But we have not yet met the man who made the hunt what it was, the man who built the place where hunters were forged and trained and sent out into the night. He is one of the most important and most tragic figures in the whole story, an old man with a wounded leg and a deep weariness in his eyes. Bound to a dream he can never leave, his name is Gehrman. And to understand him, and the strange dreaming workshop he tends, we have to walk a little further into the heart of the hunt itself. Chapter 6. Gehrman, the first hunter and the hunter's dream. His name was Gehrman, which you may say as Gehrman, and he is remembered as the first hunter. He was the man who, more than any other, created the craft of the hunt. In the early days of the scourge, when the healing church needed people to put down the beasts, it was Gehrman who understood how it must be done. He was a master of weapons and of strategy, a hard and brilliant man, and he built the foundation of everything the hunters would become. He established a workshop, a place where the tools of the hunt were forged and where new hunters could be made. The trick weapons that the hunters carried, those clever blades that could transform from one shape to another in the middle of a fight, came from this tradition. The whole grim art of facing beasts and surviving the night traces back to Gehrman and the workshop he founded. But Gehrman's story did not stay in the waking world. For Gehrman, somewhere along the way, became bound to a place that exists outside of ordinary reality. It is called the Hunter's Dream, and it is one of the gentlest and saddest places in all of Yarnam's history. The Hunter's Dream is a refuge, a small pocket of safe and quiet space that hunters can reach. Picture it, a peaceful little workshop on a hill, surrounded by a garden of pale white flowers, with a great gnarled tree and gravestones standing in the grass, and beyond it all, a sky full of soft and distant stars. The light there is golden and tired, the light of a long afternoon that never quite becomes evening. After the blood and terror of the hunt, a hunter could come to the dream and find rest, and tend their weapons, and gather themselves before going out again. It is a kind of heaven, or a kind of waiting room between this world and the next, and it was Gehrman's prison. For Gehrman did not simply visit the hunter's dream, he was bound to it, trapped within it, unable to leave. An old man now, his leg lost, confined to a wheelchair, he sat in that golden garden through cycle after cycle of hunts, watching new hunters come and go, never able to wake, never able to die. How did this happen to him? It happened because of a great one. There is a being called the Moon Presence, a pale and silent cosmic entity tied to the moon that hangs over Yarnam. And it was the Moon Presence that created the hunter's dream and bound Gehrman to it. The old hunter became the dream's keeper, its host, its prisoner, serving the will of a god he never asked to serve, longing only to be free. to sleep a sleep without dreams, to finally let go. There is a terrible weariness in Gehrman, the weariness of a man who has lived far too long and seen far too much, and wants nothing now but an ending he is not permitted to have. But Gehrman was not entirely alone in the dream, and here we meet one of the quietest, most haunting presences in the whole story. In the workshop garden there is a doll. She is life-sized, beautiful, made in the likeness of a woman, and for most of her existence she is simply that, a doll, still and silent. But within the dream she comes to life. She moves, she speaks, she tends to the hunters who come there, helping them grow stronger, offering them gentle words of comfort in a soft and sorrowful voice. The doll is a caretaker, a stabilizing presence in the dream, providing kindness and continuity while individual hunters live and die and are replaced. Where did she come from? Gehrman made her, long ago, in the image of someone he loved and lost, a woman who was dear to him in the waking world. The doll is his memory given form, a tender and melancholy thing, an attempt to keep close something that was taken away. Even here, in this small story within the larger one, we find the same ache that runs through everything, the longing for what is gone, the refusal to let it go entirely, the making of a surrogate to fill the empty place. So now we have the shape of the hunt. We have Gehrman, the first hunter, who built the craft and was bound to the dream. We have the hunter's dream itself, that golden refuge and prison. We have the doll, tending the garden with her sad and gentle kindness. And we have the moon presence behind it all, the pale god pulling the strings, with purposes of its own that no human in the dream could fully understand. These pieces will all return when we reach the final part of our story, the night of the hunt itself. But there is much more history to lay down first. For while Gehrman built the hunt, the healing church above was splintering into factions, each one reaching toward the great ones in its own way, each one willing to pay a higher and higher price for the chance to touch the divine. Rest now. We are going back up into the church, into its highest and most secret chambers, where ambition turned to obsession and obsession turned to nightmare. Chapter 7. The healing church divides, vicars, choir, and the workshop. As the healing church grew into a vast and powerful body, it did not remain a single, unified thing. Great institutions rarely do. Beneath the surface of its public face, the church split into factions, each one pursuing the secrets of the blood and the great ones in its own way, often in secret, often in competition, and sometimes in open contempt for one another. To understand the city's slow descent, you have to understand these factions, the different chambers of a single diseased heart. At the public face of the church stood the vicars. A vicar was the church's highest spiritual leader, the figure the ordinary people of Yarnum looked to for guidance and comfort. The first vicar of the healing church was Lawrence himself, the founder, the man who had carried the old blood out of Bergenworth and built a faith around it. After Lawrence, the office of vicar passed down to others. The vicars led the prayers, tended the flock, and presented to the world the gentle, healing face of the church. The common people of Yarnum knew the vicars and trusted them. They did not know what lay behind them, in the church's deeper halls. For behind the gentle public faith, there were the inner circles, and the most rarefied of these was the choir. The choir was the upper echelon of the healing church, an elite and secretive order that had abandoned the simple goal of healing and turned its full attention back toward the original dream of Bergenworth. The choir wanted communion with the great ones. They wanted to reach the cosmos, to make contact with those vast beings, to gain insight and ascend. In a sense, the choir carried Master Willem's old ambition forward, but stripped of his caution and married to the church's blood and power. They conducted experiments, they studied the heavens. They sought, by every means available, to lift the veil between the human world and the divine, and they did not much care what it cost the city below them to do it. And then there was the workshop tradition, the hunters of the healing church, descended from Gehrman's original craft. The church maintained its own order of hunters, sometimes called the church hunters, charged with the brutal practical work of keeping the beast plague in check. Where the choir gazed at the stars, the church hunters waded through blood in the streets. They were the church's hands, doing the killing that the gentle public face could not acknowledge. And at the head of this hunting tradition within the church stood a man whose story is one of the most moving in all of Yharnam, a man who began as a noble protector and ended as a tragic monster. His name was Ludwig. Ludwig, which you may say as Ludwig, was the church's first true hunter, the leader of the church hunters, and a figure of genuine heroism in the city's darkest days. When the beast plague raged, and the people of Yharnam cowered in their homes, terrified of the night and the monsters it brought, it was Ludwig who gave them hope. He gathered hunters around him and led them out into the streets to face the beasts, and the people loved him for it. He was, for a time, the closest thing the city had to a true and shining hero, a man who held a torch against the darkness so that others could survive. Hold on to that image of Ludwig, the brave and noble leader, because his fate is one of the saddest turns in this entire history, and we will return to him in due course. For now, simply know that the church's hunters had a hero at their head, and that the people of Yharnam slept a little easier because of him. So picture the healing church now, in the fullness of its power, as a thing of many layers. At the top, the vicars, gentle and public, leading the prayers. In the hidden chambers, the choir, gazing at the cosmos, hungry for communion with the great ones. In the streets and the night, the church hunters under Ludwig, holding back the tide of beasts. And beneath all of it, always, the old blood flowing through every vein of the institution, healing and corrupting in equal measure. It was a structure built over an abyss, and the deeper its members reached toward the divine, the closer they came to the edge. But the healing church was not the only group in Yharnam reaching for the great ones. There was another, smaller, even more extreme order, one that would commit perhaps the most infamous act in the whole history of the city. They called themselves the School of Mensis, and their ambition was not merely to commune with a great one, but to give birth to one, in the flesh, in the waking world. Their story is a descent into nightmare, quite literally. Let your breathing slow, and let us follow them down into the dark. Chapter 8. The School of Mensis and the Nightmare of Murgo. The School of Mensis was a scholarly faction, an offshoot tied to the church and to Byrgenwerth's old ambitions, and its name carries a clue to its obsession. Mensis, which you may say as Mensis, relates to the idea of the month, of the moon's cycle, of months and motherhood and birth. For the School of Mensis was obsessed, above all else, with the dream of birth. They wanted to do what Queen Yharnam had done in the deep ages of the Thumerians. They wanted to make contact with a great one and bring forth a child of that union, a newborn god, in the waking world. Where the choir wished to commune with the cosmos, Mensis wished to give it a body. It was the oldest dream of the Thumerians, reborn in a darker and more desperate age. At the head of the School of Mensis was a scholar named Mikolash, which you may say as Mikolash, and he was a man utterly consumed by his obsession. Mikolash dreamed of the cosmos. He longed to become a great one himself, to ascend beyond his small human form into something vast and divine. He styled himself the host of the nightmare, and he gave himself over completely to the pursuit of cosmic insight, even as it hollowed out his mind and twisted him into something barely human. Mikolash was brilliant, and he was mad, and the line between those two things in Yharnam was always perilously thin. The School of Mensis conducted a ritual, a great and terrible working meant to summon and bind a great one, to achieve the birth they so desperately sought. And the ritual succeeded, in a way, though not in the way they had hoped. For the rituals of Mensis tore a hole between the waking world and another place, a realm of dream and horror that came to be called the Nightmare of Mensis. The scholars, reaching for the divine, instead found themselves drawn into a nightmare of their own making, a dark and twisted realm suspended outside ordinary reality, where the laws of the waking world bent and broke. The School of Mensis became trapped, in a sense, in the very nightmare they had opened, lost in their own ambition. At the centre of this nightmare was a Great One and a child. The infant Great One that Mensis sought to bring into the world is called Murgo, which you may say as Murgo. Murgo was the orphan that the ritual was bound up with, a newborn cosmic being, and the whole dark working of Mensis revolved around this child. There is a presence in the nightmare called the Wet Nurse, a vast and shadowy guardian wreathed in blades and feathers, that watches over the infant Murgo, protecting it. And throughout the nightmare, if you listen, you can hear the sound of an infant crying, a thin and ceaseless wailing that never stops. The cry of a cosmic child caught between worlds. It is one of the most haunting sounds in all of Yharnam. That endless infant cry echoing through the dark, the sound of the school of Mensis's terrible success and terrible failure tangled together. The ritual of Mensis did something else too, something that reached out of the nightmare and into the waking city of Yharnam, with catastrophic consequences, for the ritual was tied to the moon and to the night, and it was the working of Mensis that helped to summon the blood moon, the great red moon that hangs over Yharnam on the night of the hunt. When that moon rises, the boundary between the waking world and the world of nightmares grows thin. The Great Ones draw near, the beasts multiply, and the night of the hunt stretches on, refusing to end, trapping the people of the city in an endless cycle of blood and terror. The school of Mensis, reaching for the birth of a god, instead helped to plunge their entire city into a waking nightmare from which it could not wake. Their ambition cracked the world. And here we see, once again, the great pattern of this whole history repeating itself. Queen Yharnam reached for a child of the Great Ones, and was left in mourning. The school of Mensis reached for the very same thing, ages later, and brought down a nightmare and a blood moon upon their city. The yearning for cosmic communion, for that impossible union of human and divine, draws people again and again toward the same flame, and again they are burned, and the city burns with them. The crying of the infant Murgo in the dark is, in its way, an echo of the weeping queen in the deep. The same loss, the same longing, the same refusal to let the dream go, no matter the cost. But we have not yet reached the very deepest sin of Yharnam, the single act of cruelty and violation that lies at the rotten core of everything. To find it, we have to leave the city and the church and the nightmare behind, and travel to a small doomed village by the sea. There, the scholars of the church found a dead god washed upon the shore, and what they did to her, and to her unborn child, is the wound from which the whole curse of Yharnam ultimately flows. Settle in. This is the darkest chapter of the history, but it is told gently, as all things are told here. Let us go down to the water's edge, to the place called the fishing hamlet. Chapter 9. The fishing hamlet and the sin against Kos. There is a place that almost no one in Yharnam remembers. A small fishing village on a lonely stretch of coast, far from the tall towers and the gas-lit streets. It is called the fishing hamlet, and it is the site of the oldest and deepest wound in this entire story. Everything we have spoken of so far, the blood and the church and the scourge and the nightmares, all of it traces back, in the end, to what happened in this quiet, doomed village by the sea. If Yharnam has an original sin, it was committed here. Long ago, a great one washed up on the shore near the fishing hamlet. Her name was Kos, which you may say simply as Kos, though some pronounce it Kossum, and the uncertainty is fitting, for almost everything about her is wrapped in mystery and grief. Kos was a great one of those vast cosmic beings, and somehow she had come to rest upon the shore, dead, her enormous body lying in the sand and the surf like a beached whale of impossible scale and strangeness. And Kos was with child. Within her great dead body, she carried an unborn great one, her infant, the orphan of Kos, who had never been brought into the world. The people of the fishing hamlet lived alongside this dead god. They were strange folk, isolated and inbred, touched by their proximity to the cosmic, and over generations they had become something not entirely human, fishermen with a tilt of the eldritch about them. They lived their hard, quiet lives by the sea, in the shadow of the dead Great One on their shore, and they might have been left in peace had the scholars of the church not come looking, for the Byrgenwerth scholars and the healing church that grew from them learned of Kos, this dead god lying on a distant shore, and they could not resist. Here was a Great One they could actually reach, actually touch, actually study, a body they could open and examine and learn from. And so they came to the fishing hamlet, and they did the unforgivable thing. They violated Kos. They dissected her dead body. They cut into the corpse of a god in their hunger for cosmic insight, and they tore from her the secrets they sought, and in doing so they violated her unborn child as well, the orphan that had never drawn breath. It was an act of desecration so profound that it tore a wound in the very fabric of reality. The scholars got what they came for: knowledge, insight, perhaps even some of the cosmic power they so craved. But the price was a curse beyond anything they could have imagined, for as Kos lay dying, or perhaps already dead, she left behind a curse upon those who had wronged her. The hunters and scholars who violated her and her child were marked, doomed, drawn into a nightmare of their own, a realm of eternal punishment called the Hunter's Nightmare. And the fishing hamlet itself was destroyed, its people slaughtered or transformed, the whole village swallowed into nightmare and ruin, its inhabitants left to wander forever as twisted, mourning things, crying out against the cruelty that had been done to them. The phantasms and the villagers of the hamlet, even in their ruin, carry the weight of that injustice. There is a sense, when you walk through the drowned streets of the fishing hamlet, of a wrong so deep it has soaked into the very stones and the very sea, a grief and a fury that will never be soothed. And the orphan of Kos, that unborn child torn untimely from its dead mother, became one of the most pitiable and terrible figures in all of Yharnam. It exists within the nightmare, a newborn Great One racked with the agony and rage of a creature that was violated before it could even live, screaming its grief at the world that wronged it. When you understand what was done to it, the horror of the orphan becomes something closer to sorrow. It is not evil. It is a child born into pain and violation, lashing out at the only world it has ever known, a world that murdered its mother and tore it from the womb. Of all the tragic figures in this history, the orphan of Kos may be the most purely tragic, an innocent made monstrous by the cruelty done to it. The sin against Kos is the rotten root of the whole tree. The scholars wanted cosmic insight, and they got it, but the insight came soaked in the blood of a violated god and her child, and that violation cursed everything that grew from it. The hunter's nightmare, the doom of the church's hunters, the unending grief that haunts the edges of Yharnam, all of it flows from this act. The old blood, the scourge, the church's ambition, and beneath it all this single unforgivable cruelty by the sea. The whole beautiful, doomed city of Yharnam rests on a foundation of desecration, and the dead god on the shore, and her screaming orphan, will have their reckoning before the story is done. Breathe slowly. The worst of the history has been told now. From here, the threads begin to gather, and we move toward the great and terrible night when all of these old sins came due at once. Chapter 10. Cainhurst, the Vile Bloods, and the Executioners. Not all of the blood in this story flowed through the healing church. There was another great power in the land, older in some ways than the church itself, a noble house whose name still echoes with cold elegance and tragedy. It was the House of Cainhurst, and its story is a thread of the history we must not leave untold, for it shows us yet another way that the people of this world tried to grasp at power and immortality through blood, and what it cost them. Cainhurst was a castle, a grand and beautiful estate of pale stone and high spires, set far from Yharnam amid a frozen and desolate land. It was the seat of a noble bloodline, the Cainhurst nobility, aristocrats of refinement and old power. But the nobles of Cainhurst were not ordinary aristocrats. They had become something else through their relationship with blood. They were Vile Bloods, and at their head ruled a queen named Annalise, the Queen of the Vile Bloods. The Vile Bloods sought immortality and power through the consumption of blood, gathering and drinking what they called blood dregs, the corrupted essence drawn from particular hunters and victims. Through this dark sacrament, The Cainhurst nobility hoped to perpetuate their line and their power forever, a kind of vampiric aristocracy sustained by stolen blood. You can see, can you not, how the obsession with blood ran through every level of this world, not only the church but the nobility too, everyone reaching for some great estate, some escape from death and weakness. Through the same dangerous substance, Cainhurst's pursuit was different in flavour from the church's, more aristocratic, more vampiric, but the route was the same. Blood was the path to power, and power was worth any price. The healing church did not look kindly upon the vile bloods of Cainhurst. The two powers came into conflict, and the church, in its righteousness, declared the vile bloods to be heretics, abominations, a corruption to be wiped out, and so the church created a force to deal with them, an order of grim and zealous warriors called the executioners. The executioners were holy knights of a sort, dedicated to hunting down and destroying the vile bloods, to ending the heresy of Cainhurst once and for all. They were led by a figure of terrible conviction named Logarius, which you may say as Logarius, a martyr and a fanatic who gave himself entirely to the holy war against the vile bloods. Logarius and his executioners marched upon Cainhurst Castle. They fell upon the nobility in a great and bloody assault, and they slaughtered the vile bloods, putting the aristocrats to the sword in the name of the church and its righteousness. Cainhurst, that beautiful pale castle in the frozen wastes, became a tomb, its halls silent, its nobles dead, its glory ended in massacre. And Logarius, having done his terrible work, remained behind. He took up a long and lonely vigil, seating himself upon a throne to guard against the return of the vile blood queen, watching over the ruins of the house he had destroyed, until he himself became a kind of monument to the war, a dead king guarding a dead kingdom. But the queen of the vile bloods, Annalise, was not entirely destroyed. She endured, bound and imprisoned, undying but broken, a queen without a court, clinging to the faintest hope that her bloodline might one day be reborn. There is a deep sadness in Cainhurst, the sadness of a proud and ancient house brought low, of immortality sought and immortality lost, of a queen left alone in the ruins of everything she ruled. The vile bloods reached for eternal life through blood, just as the church reached for healing and the scholars reached for insight, and like all the others, they found ruin at the end of their reaching. The story of Cainhurst is, in a way, the story of Yharnam in miniature. A people seek transcendence through blood. The blood gives them power for a time, and then it brings them to destruction, whether through their own corruption or through the violence of those who fear them. Over and over, in every corner of this world, the same tragedy plays out. The pale and frozen ruins of Cainhurst stand as one more monument to it, a beautiful and lonely grave in the snow. And somewhere in those ruins, the last queen of a dead people waits, dreaming of a rebirth that may never come. Let the cold and the silence of Cainhurst settle over you now, soft as snowfall, and we will turn back toward the church and its deepest, strangest experiments. Chapter 11. The Research Hall, Lady Maria, and the Living Failures. We return now to the healing church, and to its most secret and most sorrowful chambers, the places where the hunger for cosmic insight turned into something cold, and clinical, and cruel. For the choir and the upper church did not only gaze at the stars and pray for communion, they experimented, they took living people and they tried to transform them, to evolve them, to force open the inner eyes that Master Willem had once dreamed of, and the results were among the most heartbreaking creatures in all of Yharnam. High in the church's domain, hidden away from the eyes of the city, stood a place called the Research Hall, and above it rose the astral clock tower, a tall and lonely spire reaching toward the heavens. Here, the church's scholars conducted their experiments upon human subjects, patients drawn from the city in pursuit of cosmic ascension. They believed that through these experiments they might create a being capable of communing with the Great Ones, a person evolved beyond ordinary human limits. And so they took patients into the research hall, and they worked upon their bodies and their minds, filling their heads with fluid, opening their senses to the cosmos, trying to force the leap from human to something higher. The results were the living failures, and the name alone tells you the tragedy of them. They did not ascend, they did not become great ones, or anything close. Instead, they were broken, twisted, ruined, left as failed experiments, neither fully human nor anything else, drifting in their pain and confusion. The research hall became a place of quiet horror, full of these failed patients, these living failures, wandering its halls in eternal suffering, victims of the church's relentless ambition. The scholars reached for the stars and left a hall full of broken people in the reaching. Among the patients of the research hall, there is one whose small story stays with you. She was a patient who longed for nothing more than to gaze upon the beautiful sky, the cosmos that the church so worshipped, and in the end her wish was granted in the cruelest way. Her brain was open to the heavens, and she was given her sky, but at the cost of everything else, transformed into something monstrous and lost. The patients of the research hall are not enemies to be feared so much as victims to be mourned. Ordinary people who came to the church for help and were turned into instruments of its mad ambition. There is a tenderness in their story and a terrible sadness that lingers long after the horror fades. And presiding over this place, or at least deeply tied to it, was one of the most beloved and tragic figures in all of Yarnham, a hunter of grace and sorrow named Lady Maria. Maria was a hunter, and more than that, she was kin to Gehrman in spirit, his student and his companion, and the doll in the hunter's dream was made in her image, which is why the doll wears the face she wears. Maria was beautiful and skilled and noble, a hunter of the astral clock tower, and she was bound up with the darkest secret of the church, the secret of the fishing hamlet, and the sin against Kos. For Lady Maria knew what had been done at the fishing hamlet. She was connected to that atrocity, perhaps descended from its people, perhaps present at the violation, and the knowledge of it weighed upon her like a stone. She could not bear what the church had done, the desecration of Kos and her child, the curse that flowed from it. And so Maria turned away from it. She cast aside her weapon, a particular blade tied to the hamlet, and she tried to bury the secret, to guard it, to keep the world from learning the truth of the wrong that had been committed. She stationed herself as a kind of keeper of the secret, watching over the path to the nightmare and the hamlet, trying to prevent anyone from following the bloody thread back to its source. Maria's whole existence became an act of guilt and concealment, a noble soul trying to hold back a truth too terrible to face. There is something deeply human in Maria's struggle. She represents the part of the church, perhaps the part of every person caught up in this history, that knew the wrong that had been done and could not undo it, and could only try to keep it hidden, to guard the secret, to stand watch over the wound and hope it would never reopen. But secrets like this do not stay buried. The blood always finds a way to the surface, and on the night of the hunt, when a new hunter comes seeking the truth, Maria's long vigil will be tested, and the secret she has guarded for so long will finally come to light. For now, let her rest in your mind as she rests at the top of her lonely clock tower, a guardian of sorrows, beautiful and sad, holding back the dark as long as she can. Breathe gently. We are nearly to the night itself, but first we must see how the city finally began to fall. Chapter 12. Old Yarnham, the fall of Ludwig, and the decay of the hunt. Before we reach the great night of the hunt, we must witness the slow collapse that came before it, the way the city and the church and the hunt itself began to rot from within, until everything was ready to come crashing down at once. For the beast plague did not stay contained. It grew, it spread, and the measures the church took against it grew more and more desperate and more cruel. There was a district of the city called Old Yarnham, the oldest part of the city, where the beast plague took hold most fiercely. As the scourge spread through Old Yarnham, transforming more and more of its people into beasts, the healing church faced a terrible decision. They could not cure the afflicted, for the blood that caused the scourge was the only medicine they had. They could not contain it through the hunt alone, for the beasts were too many. And so the church chose the most ruthless solution available to them. They sealed off Old Yarnham, quarantined it entirely, and then they purged it. They set the district to the flame and the blade, killing everyone within, beast and human alike, in a desperate effort to stop the plague from spreading to the rest of the city. Old Yarnham became a graveyard, a burned and abandoned ruin, its streets silent and its houses empty, a monument to the church's willingness to slaughter its own people rather than confront the true source of the disease. But not everyone agreed with the purge of Old Yarnham, and out of that disagreement came one of the most quietly noble figures in the whole story. There was a hunter named Jura, which you may say as Jura, who had taken part in the events of Old Yarnham and been horrified by what he saw. Jura came to a realization that set him apart from nearly every other hunter in the city. He understood that the beasts had once been people, ordinary citizens of Yarnham transformed by the blood, and that they were not truly evil, only sick, only victims of the church's poison. And so Jura turned against the hunt. He took up a position in the ruins of Old Yarnham, manning a great Gatling gun, and he became a protector of the beasts, guarding the transformed creatures of the burned district against any hunter who would come to kill them. De Jura is a strange and moving figure, a hunter who chose mercy for monsters, who saw the humanity beneath the beast and could not bring himself to keep killing. In a world drowning in blood, he chose, in his own grim way, to stop. And what of Ludwig, the church's first hunter, the shining hero who had given the people of Yarnham hope in their darkest hour? His fate is perhaps the most bitter of all. For Ludwig, the brave and noble protector, the man who held a torch against the darkness, did not escape the curse that he fought against. Somewhere in the long years of the hunt, soaked in blood, surrounded by beasts, Ludwig himself succumbed. He fell to the scourge. The great hero of Yarnham was transformed into a beast, a monstrous, pitiable creature, his nobility drowned beneath bestial hunger, lost in the hunter's nightmare that punished the church's hunters for their sins. The hero became the monster. The protector became the thing he had sworn to destroy. And yet, even in his fall, a fragment of the old Ludwig survived. For deep within the beast, when reminded of who he had been, of the people he had once protected, a flicker of his old self could return, and he could remember, with anguish, the man he used to be. There are few things in all of Yarnham sadder than Ludwig remembering himself, the noble hunter waking for a moment inside the monster, grieving for everything he has become. His fall is the fall of the whole hunt, the whole church, the whole bright promise of healing, all of it turning at last into the very horror it was meant to prevent. The hunt itself, in these late days, had decayed into something dark. Hunters who hunted too long, who spilled too much blood, lost themselves to the bloodlust, becoming as dangerous as the beasts they pursued. Mad killers who could no longer tell friend from foe, victim from monster. The hunt was meant to save the city, but the hunt had become its own kind of plague, and to deal with these fallen hunters, these hunters who had gone mad with blood, there arose hunters of hunters, grim specialists who hunted down their own kind when they lost control. One of these was a quiet, weary figure named Eileen the Crow, an old hunter who dressed in the garb and beak of a plague doctor, dedicated to putting down hunters who had succumbed to the madness of the hunt before they could harm the innocent. Eileen represents the last shred of conscience in a system that had lost its way, an old woman trying to keep the hunt from devouring itself entirely, even as she knew her own time was nearly done. So, this was Yarnham on the eve of its greatest night, a city built on blood, sick with a plague of its own making, a church splintered into factions, each reaching for the cosmos and finding only ruin, old districts burned and abandoned, heroes fallen into beasthood, hunters gone mad and other hunters hunting them, secrets buried and curses waiting, nightmares opening at the edges of the world, and a blood moon beginning to rise. Everything was ready. Every old sin, every act of ambition and cruelty and grief reaching all the way back to the weeping queen in the deep, all of it was about to come due at once, on a single endless night. And into that night, a new hunter would arrive, a stranger seeking a cure who would walk through all of this history and bring it, at last, to its reckoning. Rest now. The long night is about to begin. Chapter 13. The night of the hunt begins, and so we come, at last, to the night. Everything we have spoken of, the gods in the deep and the weeping queen, the scholars and the old blood, the church and the scourge, the hunt and the nightmares and the buried sins, all of it has led to this single endless night, and to a stranger who arrives in Yharnam knowing none of it. The stranger is a traveller, an outsider who has come to the city for one simple reason. They are seeking a cure. Perhaps they are ill, or they carry some affliction that no ordinary medicine can touch, and they have heard, as so many have, of the miraculous blood of Yharnam, the blood that can heal anything. And so they have come to this strange tall city to receive the famous blood ministration, the sacrament of the healing church, hoping to be made well. This stranger is the hunter whose footsteps we will follow through the rest of the night. They have no idea what they are walking into. They only know that they are sick, and that the blood can heal, and that is enough to bring them through the gates of the doomed city. The hunter receives the blood. In a dim and grimy clinic, the old blood is administered, entering their veins, and with it, everything changes. For to take the blood of Yharnam is to be bound to the hunt, to the dream, to the whole cosmic machinery that this city has become. As the blood takes hold, the hunter slips into unconsciousness. And when they wake, the world is not as it was. The streets are empty of ordinary life and full of beasts. The night has come, and it is the night of the hunt, and somehow the hunter knows, without being told, that they are now a hunter too, that they must take up the blade and the gun and go out into the dark, early in that first stretch of the night. The hunter finds their way to the hunter's dream, that golden refuge we visited long ago. They wake in the workshop garden, among the pale flowers, beneath the soft and distant stars. They meet the doll, who comes to life and speaks to them with gentle, sorrowful kindness, offering to help them grow stronger. They meet old Gehrman, the first hunter, weary in his wheelchair, who greets them as a fellow hunter and offers guidance, speaking of the hunt with the heavy knowledge of someone who has watched it all before, many times over. The hunter's dream becomes the hunter's home base, the safe place to which they can always return, to rest and to ready themselves before plunging back into the waking nightmare of the city. After every brush with death, they wake again in the dream, and tend their weapons, and steel themselves, and go out once more. Out in the waking city, the hunter begins their long descent through the history we have laid out tonight, encountering its remnants at every turn. In the winding streets of central Yharnam, they meet the beasts, the transformed citizens, ordinary people made monstrous by the very blood the hunter has just taken. They meet, too, the maddened townsfolk, the human survivors who have barricaded themselves in their homes, terrified of the night, suspicious of every stranger, calling out warnings and curses from behind locked doors. The city is a maze of fear and violence, every alley a danger, every shadow a threat, and the hunter must fight their way through it, learning as they go what it means to hunt. One of the first great trials of the night is an encounter with a fallen hunter, a tragic figure who shows the hunter exactly what the hunt can do to a person. This is Father Gascoigne, which you may say as Gascoigne, a clergyman and a hunter who has been hunting too long, who has lost himself to the bloodlust and the madness of the endless night. Gascoigne has forgotten who he is. He has forgotten his family, his wife who died, his daughters who search for him in the dangerous streets. By the time the hunter meets him, he is on the edge of transformation, and during their confrontation he loses his grip entirely and becomes a beast, the man drowned beneath the monster. It is a brutal and sorrowful encounter, the hunter's first real taste of the tragedy at the heart of the hunt. The understanding that the beasts they fight were once people, with families and names and lives, and that the same fate may be waiting for the hunter too. The aftermath of Gascoigne, his orphan daughters wandering the night, searching for a father who will never come home, is one of the small heartbreaks scattered throughout the long night, a reminder that every beast was once beloved by someone. From the streets of central Yharnam, the hunter ascends toward the heart of the church's power, the great cathedral ward, where the towering cathedrals and grand structures of the healing church loom over the city. Here the hunter moves through the institutional centre of everything, the religious heart of Yharnam, and begins to glimpse the deeper truths behind the city's faith. And here they face another of the great tragic figures of the night, a vicar named Amelia. Vicar Amelia is a leader of the church, a woman of genuine faith, and when the hunter comes upon her, she is deep in prayer, clutching a holy relic, pleading with her gods for deliverance. But even sincere devotion is no shield against the curse of the blood. As the hunter watches, Amelia's prayer fails her, and she transforms, her body twisting into a great pale beast, her faith devoured by the very corruption it could not understand. The transformation of Vicar Amelia is a perfect, terrible image of everything wrong with Yharnam. Here is the church's own holy leader, praying for salvation, and the blood turns her into a monster mid-prayer. There is no clearer sign that the faith of Yharnam is built on poison. With the fall of Vicar Amelia, the hunter finds a way forward, a thread leading them out of the city and toward the older mysteries beneath it. For the church and the city are only the surface of this history, and the hunter is beginning, without quite knowing it, to follow the bloody thread all the way back toward its source, toward Byrgenwerth and the lake and the secrets that started everything. The night is deepening, the moon is changing, and the deeper the hunter goes, the more the veil between the human world and the cosmic begins to thin. Rest now, and breathe slow, for the hunter is about to leave the streets of the city behind and step into the strange and dreaming places where the great ones wait. Chapter 14. Byrgenwerth, Rom, and the lifting of the veil. The hunter's path leads them at last out of the city entirely, through ancient and forbidden woods, toward the place where all of this began. They come to the shore of a misty lake, and across the still black water stands an old and ivy-grown college, its tall windows dark, its halls long abandoned. They have come to Byrgenwerth, the birthplace of the whole tragedy, the college where Master Willem first dreamed of more eyes, and where Lawrence first looked upon the old blood, with hope in his heart. The hunter does not know all of this history, but they feel the weight of the place, the sense that here, on this quiet shore, the answer to everything is waiting. And here, in the deepest part of Byrgenwerth, the hunter finds Master Willem himself, or what remains of him. He is impossibly old now, ancient beyond reckoning, withered and frail, rocking gently in a chair on a high balcony overlooking the lake. He has not left this place in a very long time. He has sat here, the last guardian of his own old dream, murmuring to himself across the centuries, watching the water. And when the hunter approaches, Willem cannot truly speak with them, cannot explain, can only gesture toward the lake and repeat the broken fragments of his lifelong obsession. Eyes, we are born of the blood. Eyes to line our brains. The old master, who once dreamed of lifting humanity to the stars, is now only a husk muttering at the edge of the water, the last living echo of a hope that curdled into horror. There is a deep sadness in finding Willem like this, the architect of the dream reduced to a whisper, guarding a truth he can no longer share. But Willem's gesture toward the lake is the key. For out in those misty waters, submerged and hidden, dwells one of the great ones, and it is the presence of this being that has been holding back a terrible secret all this time. Her name is Rom, called the Vacuous Spider, and she is one of the strangest and most pitiable of the great ones the hunter will encounter. Rom was not always a great one. Long ago, it is said, she was a scholar of Byrgenwerth, a person who through ritual and old blood was elevated, transformed into a great one, ascending in the way the scholars always dreamed of. And in becoming a great one, Rom gained a strange and crucial power. She conceals, she hides things. Rom's very existence draws a veil over the world, keeping certain truths hidden from human eyes, keeping the cosmic horrors of Yharnam concealed from those who are not ready to see them. This is why the city has been able to go on as it has. Why the ordinary people of Yharnam have never seen the great ones that surround them, never glimpsed the cosmic truth beneath their faith. Rom has been hiding it all, drawing her veil across the world, keeping the unbearable reality out of sight. She floats in the lake, vast and vacuous, surrounded by a swarm of lesser spiders, a guardian of ignorance, a keeper of the merciful blindness that has let the city sleep through its own damnation. And the hunter, in the deep logic of the night, must end her. For to learn the truth, to see the cosmos as it truly is, to follow the thread all the way to its end, the veil must be lifted. And to lift the veil, Rom must fall. When the hunter slays Rom, the vacuous spider, everything changes. The veil is torn away. The world the hunter has been walking through is revealed to be only a surface, a comfortable illusion, and beneath it the true cosmic horror of Yharnam comes flooding into view. Above all, the moon transforms. The pale moon that has hung over the city swells and reddens, becoming the great blood moon, the pale blood moon, descending low and enormous over Yharnam, bathing everything in its terrible crimson light. The blood moon is the sign that the boundary between the human world and the world of the great ones has all but dissolved. With the veil gone and the blood moon risen, the cosmic beings draw near, the nightmares bleed into the waking world, and the night, which was already long, becomes truly endless, a night that cannot give way to dawn because the ordinary rules of reality no longer apply. This is the great turning point of the whole night, the moment the hunter passes from hunting beasts to confronting gods. Until now, the horror of Yharnam has worn a familiar face, monsters and madmen and fallen hunters, things of blood and flesh. But with Rom dead and the veil lifted, the true scale of things becomes visible. The hunter begins to understand, dimly, that the beast plague and the church and the hunt were never the real story. The real story is the great ones, and the old cosmic yearning, and the surrogates, and the long, sad reaching across the gulf between human and divine. The hunter has gained insight, real insight, the very thing the scholars of Byrgenwerth always craved, and with that insight comes the ability to see what was always there, hidden in plain sight. New presences become visible in the sky and the streets, vast and alien shapes that were there all along, unseen behind Rom's merciful veil. And now, with the blood moon high and the veil torn, the hunter is drawn toward the deepest and most terrible places of all, the nightmare realms where the oldest sins of the city have been festering. For the lifting of the veil does not only reveal the truth, it opens the way into the nightmares themselves, into the nightmare of Mensis where the infant Murgo cries in the dark, and into the hunter's nightmare where the church's hunters pay forever for the sin against Kos. The hunter must descend into these realms, into the very heart of the city's cosmic guilt, to face the things that have been waiting there since the beginning. Breathe slowly now. The hunter stands beneath the blood moon, the veil gone, the truth laid bare, and ahead lie the nightmares. We follow them down into the last and deepest dark. Chapter 15, The Cosmos Revealed, Insight and the Great Ones of Yharnam. Before we follow the hunter down into the nightmares, let us linger for a while in that strange moment after the veil was lifted, when the world of Yharnam was suddenly revealed to be something far vaster and stranger than anyone had ever known. For with Rom dead and the blood moon risen, the hunter could now see, and what they saw changes everything about how we understand this city and its history. The key to it all is a thing called insight. Insight is the currency of cosmic understanding in Yharnam, the measure of how much a person has perceived of the true nature of the world. It is gained by witnessing the cosmic, by encountering the great ones and their works, by gathering the strange knowledge that the scholars of Byrgenwerth always craved. And here is the terrible irony at the heart of insight, the thing that Master Willem feared and never quite managed to say. The more insight a person gains, the more they can see, and the more they can see, the more horror surrounds them. A person with no insight walks through Yharnam and sees only a sick city full of beasts and frightened townsfolk. But a person with high insight walks through the very same streets and sees the great ones clinging to the buildings, hears voices that should not exist, perceives the vast and alien presences that were always there, hidden just beyond the edge of ordinary sight. Insight does not make the world safer, it makes the world more dangerous, because it reveals the dangers that were always present. To understand Yharnam is to be unable to unsee it, and that knowledge can break a mind. There is even a particular danger, a kind of madness called frenzy, that comes from perceiving too much too quickly, the mind overwhelmed by a truth it was never built to hold. This is why the scholar's dream was always doomed in a way they could not grasp. They wanted eyes, more perception, believing that to see more was to rise higher. But to see the cosmos as it truly is, for a creature as small as a human being, is not enlightenment. It is exposure. It is standing naked before something so vast that the very act of comprehending it begins to unmake you. Willem's instinct to fear was right. He simply could not stop the others from reaching anyway. And what did the hunter see, once their own eyes were opened? They saw the great ones of Yharnam, the cosmic beings who had been present all along, woven into the city's faith and its architecture and its very air. There was Amygdala, which you may say as Amygdala, a vast and many-limbed great one that hangs from the heights of the city, clinging to towers and ceilings, invisible to those without insight but looming enormously over those who can see. The people of Yharnam had walked beneath Amygdala for generations and never known it was there, watching, present, an entire god hiding in plain sight above their heads. To gain insight was to suddenly understand that the city had never been empty of the divine. It had been crowded with it. The gods were always watching. The people simply could not see. There was Odin, which you may say as Eidon or Odon, perhaps the most mysterious of all the great ones tied to Yharnam. Odin is a formless great one, a being without a body, existing only as a kind of voice, a will, a presence carried in blood itself. Odin has no shape to fight or to fear, and yet Odin may be the most pervasive god of all. For Odin is bound up with the blood echoes that flow through the whole city, the very essence that the hunters gather and the church distributes. There is a chapel named for this formless god, Odin Chapel, and like its namesake, Odin works through blood and through yearning. A bodiless deity seeking, like all the great ones, a child and a continuation. That so much of Yharnam's life flowed through a substance tied to a formless, child-seeking god tells you, once more, how completely the cosmic had infiltrated the mortal world here, unseen and unsuspected. And there was the choir's great secret, kept in the highest and most hidden reaches of the cathedral. We spoke long ago of the choir, that elite inner order of the church that turned away from healing and toward communion with the cosmos. With insight, the hunter could now find what the choir had been hiding, and it was extraordinary. Deep within the grandest cathedral, the choir kept a true and living great one, a being they had drawn close to and bound, a daughter of the cosmos named Ebrietas, which you may say as Ebriatas. Ebrietas, the daughter of the cosmos, was the choir's path to the divine, the great one through whom they hoped to achieve their cosmic communion, kept hidden in the holiest place in the city. She kneels in that grand and silent cathedral, vast and strange and sorrowful, a goddess held close by the men who worshipped her, and there is a terrible loneliness about her, the loneliness of a cosmic being surrounded by tiny worshippers who can never truly reach her. The choir gathered around Ebrietas seeking ascension, and they produced strange offspring of their experiments, the celestial emissaries and the pale alien beings that drift through the upper cathedral, the children of their cosmic obsession. When you understand all of this, the city of Yharnam transforms in your mind. It was never simply a city with a plague. It was a city built atop and within a hidden cosmos, surrounded on all sides by great ones, threaded through with their blood and their presence, watched over by gods that its people could not perceive. The faith of the church, the gentle prayers in the cathedral, were prayers offered, without knowing it, to beings of unimaginable scale dwelling just beyond the veil. The whole tragedy of Yharnam is the tragedy of a people living inside a mystery so large they could not see its edges, reaching toward it with blood and ritual, and being slowly consumed by the very thing they worshipped. To gain insight, at the end of the night, is to finally see the true shape of the trap that the city had always been inside. And it is almost too much to bear. Breathe slow, and let that vastness settle gently, the way the cold of deep space might settle, distant and quiet, and strangely peaceful now that the fear has passed. Chapter 16. Alfred, Eileen, and the Threads of the Hunt. Amid all the cosmic vastness, the gods and the nightmares, and the endless reaching, it is easy to forget that the night of the hunt was also full of small human stories, individual souls caught up in the great machinery, each with their own hopes and griefs and ends. As the hunter moved through the long night, they crossed paths with these other figures, and the threads of their stories wove through the larger tale, giving it a human weight that all the cosmic horror could never quite erase. Let us spend a quiet while with a few of them, for their stories are among the most moving in all of Yharnam, and they remind us that beneath the gods there were always people. There was Alfred, a hunter the player meets early in the night, a cheerful and devout man, an executioner in the old tradition, dedicated body and soul to the healing church and to the destruction of the vile bloods of Cainhurst. Alfred carries the old hatred forward into the present night, the long war between the church's executioners and the blood-drinking nobility of the frozen castle. He is warm and friendly to the hunter, almost endearingly so, full of zeal and good cheer, and he has given his entire life to a single purpose: the hunt for the vile blood queen, the desire to finish the holy work that Ligarius began so long ago. Alfred dreams of finding and destroying Queen Annalise, the last of the vile bloods, to complete the church's ancient crusade and earn his place among the blessed. And in time, Alfred achieves his dream, though the achievement reveals the rotten heart of his devotion. He finds his way to Cainhurst, to the imprisoned Queen Annalise, and he destroys her, crushing the last of the vile bloodline in a frenzy of righteous violence. But there is no glory in it, only horror. Alfred, having committed his great act of faith, is left sitting amid the gore of what he has done, having reduced the proud and ancient queen to a ruin, and the cheerful devout man we met at the start of the night is revealed as a fanatic whose faith led him only to slaughter. Alfred's story is the story of the executioners in miniature, the story of how righteous zeal, pursued to its end, becomes indistinguishable from the evil it claims to fight. He wanted so badly to be good, to serve, to complete the holy work, and the holy work was always, in the end, a massacre. There is a deep sadness in Alfred, the sadness of a sincere heart given over to a cause that could only ever produce more blood. There was Eileen the Crow, whom we met before, the old hunter in the plague doctor's garb, the hunter of hunters, dedicated to putting down those of her own kind who had lost themselves to the madness of the hunt. Through the long night, the hunter crosses Eileen's path more than once, and her story is one of duty carried past the point of exhaustion. Eileen is old and tired, and she knows that her time is nearly done, that she has hunted too long, and that the night may finally claim her. There is a particular fallen hunter she is pursuing, a former companion named Henrik, a hunter who has succumbed to the blood-drunk madness, and Eileen means to end him before he can harm the innocent, even though it costs her dearly to hunt down someone she once knew. The hunter may come upon Eileen wounded, near death, having pushed herself past her limits, and may take up her grim work in her place, finishing the hunt she could not finish. Eileen represents the last shred of conscience in the dying hunt, an old woman trying to keep the killing from spreading even as it threatens to consume her too, passing her burden, perhaps, to a younger hunter before she fades. She is weary, and she is dutiful, and there is a worn-down nobility about her that lingers. And there was the small and fragile community that gathered, during the night, in Odin Chapel, that refuge named for the formless god. As the beasts roamed and the night stretched on, frightened survivors sought safety, and the hunter could guide them to the chapel, to shelter, to one another. A man called the Chapel Dweller kept the place, A woman of the night named Ariana came there for safety, and another woman, Adela, a nun, came as well. And for a little while there was something like sanctuary. A handful of ordinary souls huddled together against the dark, kept alive by the hunter's guidance. But Yharnam does not allow such small mercies to last. The fragile community of the chapel could fall apart in terrible ways, suspicion and madness, and the corrupting influence of the blood turning the survivors against one another, the nuns' faith curdling into murderous zeal, the sanctuary becoming a slaughterhouse. The story of Odin Chapel is the story of how even the small human refuge, the simple act of gathering the frightened together for safety, could not hold against the horror that saturated the city, where the hunter sent each survivor, who lived and who died, who turned and who endured, became a quiet thread of choices running beneath the cosmic spectacle, a reminder that in the end, every great catastrophe is made of individual people, each one trying simply to survive the night. These threads, Alfred and his fanatic's faith, Eileen and her weary duty, the doomed sanctuary of the chapel, are the human heartbeat of the long night. They do not change the cosmic story, the gods and the nightmares, and the great reckoning. But they ground it. They remind us that Yharnam was not only a stage for divine tragedy, but a city full of living people. Each one caught in the same trap, each one reaching in their own small way for safety, or purpose, or grace, and each one swept up in the same tide of blood. When we mourn Yharnam, it is these people we mourn, the cheerful zealot and the tired old crow and the frightened survivors in the chapel, as much as the weeping queen and the lonely gods. Hold them gently in your mind as the night deepens. And now, with the cosmos revealed and the human threads gathered, the hunter must finally descend into the nightmares, where the oldest sins of the city wait to be answered at last. Chapter 17. The Nightmares and the Reckoning of Old Sins. Beneath the blood moon, with the veil torn away, the hunter descends into the nightmares, those realms of dream and horror that the rituals and sins of Yharnam tore open in the fabric of reality. These are the deepest places in the whole night, and within them wait the consequences of everything the city ever did, given monstrous form and left to fester outside of time. The first of these is the nightmare of Mensis, the realm opened by the school of Mensis in their desperate ritual to birth a great one. The hunter makes their way into this twisted dream, a dark and oppressive place suspended outside the waking world, and at its heart they find the infant great one, Murgo, the child the scholars sought to bring forth. Throughout the nightmare, the thin and ceaseless crying of the infant echoes, that haunting wail we spoke of long ago, the cry of a cosmic child caught between worlds. And to reach Murgo, the hunter must pass through the remnants of the school of Mensis and the horrors their ritual produced. Among those horrors is a thing called the One Reborn, a grotesque amalgamation, a mass of fused bodies and faces stitched together by the rituals of Mensis, a failed attempt to create something divine that resulted only in a writhing monument to human folly. The One Reborn is the school of Mensis's ambition made flesh, the dream of birthing a god collapsed into a heap of corpses and suffering. And presiding over the nightmare, scattered and elusive, is Mikolash himself, the host of the nightmare, the scholar who wanted so badly to become a great one. By the time the hunter finds him, Mikolash is utterly lost, trapped in his own dream, raving about the cosmos and Murgo and the great ascension he believes is at hand, crying out his mad prayers into the dark. He longs to be a great one, to ascend, and he never will, and somewhere in his ranting there is the desperate, pitiable hope of a man who gave up everything for a dream that was never going to come true. When the hunter ends Mikolash, his obsession ends with him, but the nightmare grinds on. At the very heart of the nightmare of Mensis waits the guardian of the infant Murgo, the great shadowy presence called the Wet Nurse, wreathed in blades and feathers, an entity of darkness and stars that watches over the cosmic child. To reach Murgo, to bring the nightmare of Mensis to its end, the hunter must face this guardian beneath the blood moon, in a confrontation that feels less like a battle and more like a strange and solemn ritual. Two figures moving through a field of darkness and falling light, and when the guardian falls, the infant's cry is silenced at last. The death of Murgo and the silencing of that endless cry brings the long night closer to its end, for it was tied to the very forces holding the night in place. With Murgo gone, the machinery that kept the night endless begins, finally, to wind down. But there is still one more nightmare to face, and it is the oldest and the saddest of them all. For the hunter, following the bloody thread to its very source, finds their way into the hunter's nightmare, the realm of eternal punishment born from the sin against Kos at the fishing hamlet. This is the nightmare where the church's hunters, those who violated the dead god and her child, are doomed to relive the hunt forever, trapped in their guilt, paying eternally for the desecration they committed. And here, in this realm of punishment, the hunter encounters the tragic figures we met long ago, brought to their final reckoning. Here is Ludwig, the church's first hunter, the shining hero fallen into beasthood, lost in the nightmare as a great and monstrous creature. When the hunter faces him, there comes that terrible and beautiful moment we spoke of, when something reminds Ludwig of who he once was, of the people he protected, of the man behind the beast, and for an instant the noble hunter wakes inside the monster, grieving and lucid, asking whether the good he did still meant something, whether he was still, in the end, a force for good. It is one of the most moving moments in all of Yharnam, the hero remembering himself at the very end, in the depths of the nightmare, holding on to the hope that his suffering was not entirely in vain. And here too, the hunter comes at last to Lady Maria, the guardian of the secret, who has stood watch over the path to the hamlet for so long. Maria does not wish the hunter to go further. She has given her existence to keeping the truth buried, to preventing anyone from reaching the source of the curse. But the hunter has come too far, and the veil is too thin. And in the end, Maria cannot hold them back. When she falls, the last guardian of the secret falls with her, and the way to the fishing hamlet. And the truth at the bottom of everything lies open. The hunter walks at last into the fishing hamlet itself, the drowned and cursed village by the sea, and feels the weight of the oldest sin settle over them. They move through the ruined streets, past the mourning, twisted villagers, toward the shore where the dead god once lay, where the church committed its unforgivable act. And on that cursed beach, beneath a sky of impossible stars, the hunter comes face to face with the final and most tragic of all the creatures of Yharnam, the orphan of Kos. The unborn child, torn from its dead mother, born into agony and violation, screaming its grief and rage at the world that wronged it. It is a newborn great one racked with pain, and to face it is to face the very heart of the city's guilt, the consequence of the violation that started everything. The hunter must end the orphan's suffering, must put down this child of cosmic sorrow, and in doing so, the long chain of vengeance that began with the desecration of Kos reaches its conclusion. The dead god's curse, in a sense, is finally answered, the wound finally, terribly, closed. There is no triumph in it. There is only the quiet of a beach after a storm, and the sense that an ancient grief has at last been laid to rest, at a cost beyond reckoning. With the nightmares cleared, the old sins reckoned, Murgo silenced and the orphan stilled, the hunter has done what no one before them managed to do. They have followed the bloody thread of Yharnam's history all the way back to its source and severed it. The machinery of the endless night has been dismantled, piece by piece, sin by sin. And now, with the long work nearly done, the hunter must return to where they began, to the hunter's dream, to old Gehrman waiting in his golden garden, for the night is reaching its end at last, and a choice awaits, a choice that will determine not only the fate of the hunter, but the very nature of what they will become. Rest now, and breathe deep. We have walked the whole long history together, from the deep below to the blood moon above. Only the ending remains. Chapter 18, The Descent into the Labyrinth and the Return to the Queen. There is one more journey the hunter may take on this endless night, and it is perhaps the most fitting of all, for it carries them all the way back to the very beginning of this whole history, down beneath the city, into the deep where everything started. We began our tale in the labyrinths of the Pthumerians, with the weeping queen and the lost child of a god. And on the night of the hunt, a hunter who seeks the deepest truths may descend, once more, into those ancient tombs, closing the great circle of the story by returning to its source. Beneath Yharnam, far below the streets and the cathedrals, and even below the burned ruins of old Yharnam, lie the Chalice dungeons, the labyrinths of the Pthumerians. Accessible to those who possess the holy chalices the scholars long ago brought up from the dark. To descend into them, the hunter performs a ritual with one of these chalices, opening a path down into the buried kingdom, and step by step they leave the world of the city behind and enter the oldest place in the story. The deeper they go, the older and stranger the labyrinth becomes. The upper levels are merely ancient tombs, full of the dust and treasures of the Pthumerian dead. But further down lie the deeper kingdoms, Loran with its desert sands and its beast-cursed dead, and Is, drawn close to the cosmos and the great ones who dwell nearest the stars. Each layer is older than the last, each one closer to the foundation of everything, and the hunter descends through them like a diver sinking into black and bottomless water. The labyrinth is not empty. The Pthumerians did not all simply die away into dust. In the deepest places, their descendants endure, the deformed and ancient remnants of that lost people, still keeping their vigils, still guarding their dead and their gods after all the long ages. There are silent watchers and shadowy keepers, and there are great guardians set to protect the deepest secrets, monstrous things bred or cursed by the long centuries underground. There is a great and terrible beast bound in chains in the lower depths, a creature of the old blood and the old curse, and there are bell-ringing women who summon spirits to torment intruders, and there are the labyrinth's own gods, lesser great ones who dwell in the dark, never having seen the surface, ancient beyond the reckoning of the city above. To descend the labyrinth is to travel backward through time itself, peeling away age after age, until the hunter stands in the oldest chambers of the oldest kingdom, the place where humanity first looked upon a great one and was changed forever. And at the very bottom, in the deepest tomb of all, the hunter may come at last to her. Queen Yharnam, the Pthumerian queen, the weeping woman from whom the city above took its name, who carried the child of a god and lost it, who has sat in mourning in the deep since before the surface world had a history. To reach her is to reach the literal and spiritual foundation of everything we have spoken of tonight, every drop of old blood, every transformed beast, every reaching scholar and grieving god and doomed hunter, all of it grew from what happened here, in this chamber, with this queen and her lost cosmic child. The whole towering edifice of Yharnam's tragedy rests on this single ancient sorrow, buried so deep that almost no one ever knew it was there. When the hunter confronts the queen in her tomb, there is a strange and solemn quality to it, less a battle than a meeting between the very beginning of the story and its end. Here is the first one who reached for the union of human and divine, the first one to pay the terrible price for it, and here is the last, the hunter who has walked the whole long road and now stands before the source. The blood that runs endlessly from the queen, that grief made visible, is the same grief that has driven every event of the history. And in facing her, in laying her at last to rest, the hunter completes something, brings the oldest sorrow of all to a kind of ending, closes the circle that opened in the deep so very long ago. There is something profoundly fitting about this descent, this return to the origin, on the very night that the whole history comes to its reckoning. For all of Bloodborne is, in a sense, about the impossibility of escaping the past. The sins of the Pthumerians echoed down into the sins of Byrgenwerth, which echoed into the sins of the church, which echoed into the endless night. The blood remembered, the grief remembered. Nothing was ever truly buried, it only sank deeper and waited, and so it is right that the hunter, to truly understand the night they are living through, must go all the way down to the bottom of it, must stand in the queen's tomb and see with their own eyes the first sorrow from which all the others flowed. To know Yharnam is to know that its present was always its past, that the night of the hunt was always the night the labyrinth queen's grief finally rose all the way to the surface and swallowed the city whole. The hunter climbs back up from the labyrinth then, carrying that knowledge with them. the deepest knowledge of all. They have seen the gods in the streets, and the nightmares in the dark, and the queen in the deep. They have followed the thread of blood from the very bottom of the world all the way to the blood moon overhead. There is nothing left to learn, no deeper place to go, no older sorrow to uncover. The history is complete, in their mind and in ours. And now, with all of it known, the hunter returns one final time to the golden garden of the dream, where old Gehrman waits, and the long night, at last, demands its ending. Breathe slow now. We have been all the way to the bottom and back. Only the final choice remains. Chapter 19. The three endings and the coming of dawn. The hunter returns to the hunter's dream one final time as the long night nears its close. The golden garden waits as it always has, the pale flowers, the gnarled tree, the soft and distant stars, but everything feels different now, weighted with the knowledge of everything the hunter has seen and done. And there in the garden sits old Gehrman, the first hunter, the keeper and the prisoner of the dream, waiting for the hunter to come back to him one last time. The whole long history has come down to this quiet conversation in a garden and to the choice the hunter must now make. There are three paths before them, three possible ends to the night, and each one carries its own meaning, its own bittersweet truth. The first path is the one Gehrman offers freely, and it is, in its way, the gentlest. Gehrman, weary beyond measure, looks at the hunter with something like fatherly compassion, and he offers them release. He offers to free the hunter from the hunt, from the dream, from the whole terrible cycle of blood and beasts and nightmares. All the hunter must do is submit, lay down their life in the dream, and let Gehrman end it, and they will wake in the morning, in the waking world, with the long night behind them, like a half-remembered dream. This is the ending sometimes called Yharnam sunrise, and it represents a kind of peace, a return to ordinary mortal existence, an escape from the cosmic horror into the simple comfort of a new day. If the hunter accepts Gehrman's offer, they bow their head, and the old hunter releases them, and they wake in a transformed Yharnam as the sun rises, free at last. The nightmare ended, their humanity intact. It is the choice to step away from the abyss, to refuse the cosmic, to choose the small and human life over the vast and terrible truth. There is wisdom in it, and there is loss in it, for the hunter who chooses this path will never know what they might have become. But they will live, and they will see the dawn, and perhaps that is enough. The second path opens only if the hunter refuses Gehrman's offer, if they cannot bring themselves to simply submit and forget, if they have seen too much to walk away. If the hunter refuses, then Gehrman has no choice but to fight them, for the dream demands it, and the two hunters face each other in the garden, the old and the new, the keeper and the seeker. And should the hunter defeat Gehrman, something extraordinary happens. The moon presence itself, the pale great one that created the dream and bound Gehrman to it all those years ago, descends into the garden to claim the victorious hunter. And here the second ending takes shape, the one called honouring wishes. If the hunter submits to the moon presence, accepts its embrace, then they take Gehrman's place. They become the new keeper of the hunter's dream, the new prisoner, bound to serve the moon presence as Gehrman did before them, freeing the old hunter to finally rest while taking up his eternal burden in his stead. It is an ending of servitude and sacrifice, the hunter accepting a role within the cosmic hierarchy, becoming a part of the very machinery they fought against, so that the cycle may continue, and the old man may at last be free. There is a sad nobility in it, the hunter taking up the chains so that another may be released, but it is, in the end, a kind of imprisonment, a submission to the will of a god. And then there is the third path, the strangest and most transcendent of all, the ending called childhood's beginning. This path is only open to a hunter who, through the long night, has gathered enough cosmic insight, who has consumed certain relics of the Great Ones, 3 small umbilical cords, each one a fragment of the bond between a Great One and its lost child, each one carrying within it the accumulated sorrow of failed cosmic reproduction. If the hunter has taken these chords into themselves, absorbing the grief and the yearning of the Great Ones, then when the moon presence descends to claim them, the hunter does not submit. Instead, having absorbed enough of the cosmic, the hunter resists and confronts the moon presence directly and overcomes it. And in doing so, the hunter transcends. They do not die, and they do not become a prisoner. They are transformed, evolved, lifted into a new form of existence, becoming a newborn Great One themselves, a small and infant cosmic being. The doll, who has tended them with such gentle sorrow throughout the night, lifts the tiny new Great One into her arms, cradling it with tenderness, and the long night gives way at last to a strange new beginning. Think of what this third ending means, after everything we have heard tonight. The entire history of Yharnam has been the story of human beings reaching toward the Great Ones, trying to bridge the gulf between mortal and divine, and failing, always failing, leaving only ruin behind them. Queen Yharnam reached, and was left weeping. The scholars reached, and were left cursed. Mensis reached, and birthed a nightmare. The church reached and drowned its city in beasts. Every attempt to cross that gulf ended in tragedy. And here, at the very end, a single hunter finally does it. The thing that all of Byrgenwerth dreamed of, the thing that Willem longed for and Lawrence chased and Michaelash died for, the ascension of a human being into a Great One, finally comes to pass. Humanity finally takes the step it always longed to take. And it is the doll, that tender and sorrowful made thing, born of Gehrman's grief, who holds the new god in her arms, the surrogate child the Great Ones always sought, found at last. After all the loss, all the reaching, all the failed attempts to hold what was gone, the cosmic loneliness finds, in this one small infant, a kind of answer. It is not a happy ending exactly. It is something stranger and deeper than happiness. It is the completion of the oldest yearning in the whole story, the bridge finally built, the child finally born, the long grief finally, perhaps, beginning to heal. 3 endings, then: to wake and forget and live a human life beneath the morning sun, to take up the chains and serve the dream so another may rest, or to transcend humanity entirely and become the very thing that all of this history was reaching toward. There is no single correct choice, no clearly right path. Each one carries truth and loss and meaning. Each one is an answer to the question the whole story has been asking, the question of what a person should do when they stand at the edge of the cosmic abyss and feel it pulling at them. Step back, or serve, or leap. The hunter must choose, and in choosing, they bring the entire long history of Yharnam, all the way from the weeping queen in the deep to the blood moon overhead, to its final rest. There is one more thing worth understanding about these endings, and about the dream itself, before we let the night go. For the hunter's dream was never meant for a single hunter. It is a cycle. It has turned many times before, and unless something breaks it, it will turn many times again. Hunters have come to the dream, and grown strong, and gone out into the night, and died, and woken again, and finally reached the garden and made their choice, over and over, across spans of time we cannot measure. Gehrman watched them come and go for so long that he lost count, each one a fleeting visitor in his endless imprisonment, each one offered the same choice, each one another turn of the same patient wheel. The doll remained through all of it, the still point at the centre, tending each new hunter with the same gentle sorrow, providing the continuity that the dream required, the memory that the cycle needed to keep turning. This is why she persists, why she is always there, why her kindness never wavers no matter how many hunters live and die before her. She is the keeper of the cycle's heart, and this gives the third ending, the transcendence, its deepest meaning of all. For if the cycle had simply continued, then nothing would ever truly change. Hunter after hunter would wake, and choose, and fade, and the night would turn again. And the Great Ones would go on yearning in their cosmic loneliness, forever reaching and forever empty-handed. But when one hunter finally absorbs enough of the cosmic to resist the moon presence and ascend, the cycle itself is broken. A new Great One is born, not lost this time but held, cradled in the arms of the doll. The surrogate child the gods had sought since the very beginning finally brought safely into being. The wheel that turned for so long, grinding hunter after hunter into the dark, at last produces the thing it was always, secretly, trying to make. The grief that began with Queen Yharnam in the deep, that drove every reaching hand across the whole history, finds in this single small infant the answer it had been seeking all along. The cycle does not merely end, it completes. And in that completion, perhaps, the long loneliness of the Great Ones, and of all the broken souls who served them, finally begins to ease. That is why we can rest now, at the end of this history, because whatever ending the hunter chose, the night is over, the wheel has stopped, and the story has found its quiet. There is no more reaching to do, no more grief to chase, no more blood to spill beneath the moon. It is finished, and we can let it go. Conclusion: the dream fades, and we let go. And so the long night ends, one way or another, and the history of Yharnam comes to its close. Let us gather the threads together one last time, gently, the way you might tidy a room before turning out the light. It began with grief. It began with the Great Ones in the deep, vast and lonely beings who lost their children and reached across an impossible gulf to find them again. It began with Queen Yharnam, who carried a god's child and was left to weep in the dark forever. That grief, that yearning, that refusal to let go of what was lost ran like a thread of blood through everything that followed. The scholars of Byrgenwerth felt its pull and went searching for insight and ascension. Lawrence felt it too in his way and built a church to heal the world, and instead built a city on a substance that turned its people into beasts. The school of Mensis felt it and tried to birth a god and tore open a nightmare. The church felt it and violated a dead goddess on a lonely shore and cursed everything they touched. Again and again, across centuries, people reached toward something vast and beautiful and beyond them, and again, the reaching ended in sorrow. And yet there is something in that reaching that is not only foolish, not only doomed. There is something almost holy in it, the longing to understand, to transcend, to bridge the distance between what we are and what we might become, to hold close the things we love and refuse to let death have them. That longing is what makes the people of Yharnam tragic, but it is also what makes them human. Master Willem dreaming of eyes that could see the cosmos, Lawrence dreaming of a world without suffering, Gehrman building a doll in the image of someone he lost, the hunter at the very end becoming the child that all the lonely gods were searching for. Every one of them, in their own way, was reaching toward love, toward understanding, toward an end to grief. They paid terrible prices for it, and they left ruin in their wake, but the longing itself was never the monstrous thing. The longing was beautiful. It was only too large for the small and fragile vessels that carried it. That is the heart of Bloodborne, beneath all the blood and the beasts and the horror. It is a story about grief, and about the lengths we will go to in order to escape it, and about how those very efforts can become a horror all their own. But it is also, quietly, a story about hope, about the possibility that even the deepest loss might one day find an answer, that even the loneliest god might one day hold a child again, that even an endless night might, at last, give way to a strange new dawn. And now the dream fades. The blood moon sets, the golden garden grows dim, and the pale flowers close, and the soft and distant stars wink out one by one. The city of Yharnam, with all its towers and its secrets and its sorrows, sinks back into the dark from which we drew it, and there is nothing left for you to do, nothing to hunt, nothing to fear, nowhere to go. You have walked the whole long history, from the first descent into the deep to the last choice in the garden, and now it is finished, and you can rest. So let your breathing go slow and even. Let the weight of your body settle into the soft place where you lie. Let the city, and the church, and the gods, and the grief all drift away like mist off a quiet lake at dawn. There is no night to fear here, no moon to dread, no hunt to survive. There is only sleep, soft and deep and dreamless, waiting to take you down into the gentlest dark there is. The story is told, the thread is followed to its end. Let it all go now, and sink and rest. Sleep well, the night is over, and you are safe, and the dawn, when it comes, will be a kind one. Good night.